They were senior leaders of a group known as the IC, the intelligence community. James Clapper, the director of national intelligence. Admiral Mike Rogers was in charge of the NSA. Jim Comey was the director of the FBI. And John Brennan ran the CIA. They had come to tell Donald Trump that his election may have been compromised by Russian interference.
This was the most aggressive, the most direct, and most assertive campaign that the Russians ever mounted in the history of our elections to interfere and to somehow influence the outcome.
Behind closed doors, the IC briefing began.
It was several hours long. There was no equivocation in our language, and we were very direct and very clear in terms of what it is that we knew and assessed.
There was no pushback, and I think the reason was that the evidence that we laid out at the highly classified level was pretty compelling and been very hard to have pushback.
Trump didn't argue, but he later said he saw the talk of Russian interference as an assault on the legitimacy of his victory. The IC chiefs had one more piece of news for the president-elect. Brennan, Clapper, and Rogers left the room. James Comey stayed behind to deliver it.
Comey pulls the president aside, and he tells him, hey, listen, I need you to know that there's this, what we now call the dossier.
The dossier, a set of memos prepared by a former British spy, partially paid for by the Democrats. It was political dynamite.
Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years.
It's full of things that may be able to allow the Russians to blackmail him. It has information about him involved in perverted sexual acts.
To exploit Trump's personal obsessions and sexual perversion in order to obtain suitable compromising material on him.
The salacious and unverified allegations involved Trump and a number of Russian prostitutes in a Moscow hotel suite.
Whoa, not great. Not a great start to this relationship.
To the meeting, Comey typed this memo from the backseat of his SUV.
He then started talking about all the women who had falsely accused him of grabbing or touching them, with particular mention of a stripper who said he grabbed her, and gave me the sense that he was defending himself to me.
It didn't surprise me at all that after having this meeting with the president-elect, that he immediately memorialized it so he had it as a record if he ever needed it.
Face off again at a photo op.
Trump's dislike for James Comey was visceral. Comey was investigating the Russian collusion, and that made Trump extremely nervous. Hardly it was the infamous briefing about the dossier that drove Trump crazy.
Comey is standing in a blue blazer against blue drapes. That was not an accident. He is standing literally as far away from Trump as it is possible to be in that room.
This time, Trump made it clear who was in charge.
And the president calls him out and says, no, come here.
So let's, and there's James. He's become more famous than me.
This guy's more famous than me, which Comey knows even then is going to be a problem.
Wanting to be sure that his arm was outstretched in just such a way as to create just a nice, distant handshake. But instead, the president pulls him in and goes for the hug. It's unclear exactly why, but goes in for the hug.
Trump pulls him in and whispers something in his ear, but to the camera, it looks as if Trump is giving him a kiss on the cheek.
When somebody's president, the least tiny gesture is magnified by 12 billion times. So you call somebody over, you whisper in their ear, you kind of hug them, that's a big deal.
Jim Comey is a remarkable communicator, and I'm sure that Mr. Trump watched a lot of that testimony, if not all of it.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Schiff, members of the committee, thank you for including me in today's hearing. I'm honored to be here representing the people of the FBI. I have been authorized by the Department of Justice.
And he says, I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm. And kind of all heads turn to the television in every newsroom in America. And we're saying, is Comey going to confirm on the record that they're investigating the Trump campaign?
That the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's.
He confirms this in front of these lawmakers, and that's kind of a big moment. Suddenly we're off to the races. This is now, to Trump's mind, a direct and public threat to his presidency.
Flynn caught lying, and Sessions having recused himself, another showdown was becoming inevitable.
A notorious Moscow bank is now part of the...
And the press had also ratcheted up the pressure, as they uncovered more meetings between Russians and Trump campaign officials.
This is just not normal. It just seems like there's more and more meetings. They just keep coming out.
This time it is the president's son-in-law and senior advisor.
Many of the stories focused on Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law.
Kushner had met with a top Russian banker who was known to be close to President Putin during the transition. He had also had a conversation with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and there had been even this discussion about setting up a back-channel communication to Moscow.
In Bedminster, on that rainy weekend, without any of his most senior staff members present, Donald Trump would make the most consequential decision of his first year in office.
There is essentially no adult in the room, certainly no legal adult in the room, who really has an understanding of what this is going to mean, not just politically, but legally.
Trump decided he would get rid of Comey.
Trump comes to the conclusion that I can't put up with this anymore. I'm going to fire Jim Comey. There's no consultation. There's just gut instinct and raw anger.
Trump dictated a letter to Comey.
It is a rant. The original draft. Nobody's original draft is that great, but this draft is Donald Trump unloading all of the reasons that Comey has failed him.
Comey has been indicating that he knows so much more than he's letting on, and
Comey opens up another investigation into...
Comey isn't backing down. He said he wouldn't do anything.
To Don McGahn, the White House counsel, that this document has been prepared, and he freaks out.
Our understanding is that Don McGahn reads that and says, yeah, you don't want to send that.
Even Trump's abrasive advisor, Steve Bannon, was stunned.
Of all people, Steve Bannon is the one in the room who's saying, you can't get rid of this guy, Jim Comey. This would be a terrible, terrible mistake. It's going to cause a firestorm.
Donald Trump had fired hundreds of people face to face on The Apprentice. This time, as president, it would be different.
He just decides to do it. Trump isn't going to deliver the message himself. He sends his longtime bodyguard in a White House car with the pink slip over to the FBI to deliver the bad news.
Keith Schiller, the president's body man, can't get into the FBI. The FBI is not a place you can just walk in and be like, I have a note for Comey. I'm from the White House. Great, you're from the White House. Super. You can't come in here.
He dropped off the letter and left.
Breaking news, James Comey has been removed from heading the FBI.
Comey was out of town.
And he was at our Los Angeles field office giving a talk to the office. And, you know, behind them on the news, it said that Jim Comey was just fired by the President of the United States.
President Trump has fired James Comey as director of the FBI. It comes without warning.
He actually makes a comment to the audience like, oh, look at that, I just got fired, thinking that, you know, it was a mistake. And
morning on the president's go-to network, Fox News.
You're fired. President Trump ousting the FBI director, James Comey.
The news was all Comey all the time.
Kevin Corke is live at our nation's capital with the details.
The president would celebrate Comey's firing behind closed doors with two unlikely White House guests, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Ambassador Sergei Kislyak.
Just ahead of today's meeting, with the Russian foreign minister, Sergei.
I think there's a level on which President Trump doesn't want to be portrayed as just doing the bidding of some aides who write a memo. He's the decider, to coin a phrase.
In fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
You know, the thing with Donald Trump is he often says what he believes, and if you just wait long enough, he'll tell you the truth. I mean, he'll say it.
It is the interview that will likely dominate
The
social
interview
media.
backfired.
Comments contradict the
It triggered questions about whether Comey's firing was an attempt to obstruct justice by the president. As Comey hoped, the call for a special counsel grew louder. The decision would fall to Rod Rosenstein.
Rod Rosenstein watched his reputation get dragged through the mud for an entire week by people who he really respected. And he found there was only one way to undo the damage, and that was to appoint a special counsel.
A special counsel, the most powerful investigative weapon the Justice Department wields.
Rosenstein said, I need someone to not only stabilize the investigation, I need to stabilize the Department of Justice. It had been under siege from President Trump, from public scrutiny.
He named one of the nation's legendary prosecutors, former FBI Director Robert Mueller. Times that summer, they had a lead on what would become the biggest story yet. They had discovered another meeting between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
My colleagues and I have been doing some reporting on this. The idea that there was another Russian meeting that we didn't totally understand, that had been undisclosed during the campaign.
They learned Donald Trump Jr. had hosted the meeting with a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya. Also in the room, Jared Kushner and campaign chairman Paul Manafort. The newspaper wanted a comment from the White House. But that week, the president was in Hamburg, Germany for the G20 summit and his first meeting with Vladimir Putin.
This is a big distraction on the sidelines of the summit as the White House officials try to figure out how to respond to this inquiry from the New York Times.
The White House says, we want to be helpful. We want to engage on this. Just give us some time.
Statement that's just amateur hour. To a report in the New York Times that claims Donald Trump Jr.
Trump's statement, written for his son, said the meeting was about adoption of Russian orphans.
It was a short introductory meeting. I asked Jared and Paul to stop by. We primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children.
But there was a reason for the meeting that the president's statement did not mention.
President Trump and Russia. It involves Donald Trump Jr. breaking in the last...
It only takes about 24 hours for that statement to completely blow up.
Potential bombshell from the president's own son, Donald Trump.
In the days that followed, the New York Times discovered a series of emails setting up the meeting.
Another day, another installment in the Russian election.
The next day we reported that what had actually happened is that Don Jr. had been promised dirt on Hillary Clinton by this Russian lawyer.
The Crown Prosecutor of Russia offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia.
Ty Cobb may be on his way out.
Ty Cobb's days were also numbered.
He's unhappy with everyone because it's not over.
Trump's willingness to cooperate with the investigation was over.
The United States is currently under a criminal investigation.
And then the FBI dramatically escalated the showdown.
Breaking news tonight, and it's a bombshell. The FBI raids the office of President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
The president, as he watched the raid on television, was furious.
Trump erupted. He was very upset. He was consumed by this news all day.
Let me just stop you there. The Deputy Attorney General is speaking in Washington. Fascinating. Let's listen in.
11 of the defendants are charged with conspiring to hack into computers, steal documents, and release those documents with the intent to interfere in the election.
Rod Rosenstein came out and said, we have identified Russian GRU officers down to the offices where they sat and their exact names.
According to the allegations,
it was a remarkable moment.
The defendants worked for 2 units of the main intelligence directorate of the Russian General Staff. known as the GRU.
I can't remember a split screen moment quite like this. You have on one side the President of the United States visiting the Queen of England, and on the other side of the screen is Rod Rosenstein. A movie maker couldn't have scripted this more extraordinary.
A nearly 30-page indictment laid out the details of the Russian hacking of the 2016 election. In granular detail.
Unit 74455 was located at 22 Kirova Street, Khimki, Moscow. A building the conspirators activated ex-agents keylog and screenshot function between 4:19 p.m. and 4:56 p.m. searched for certain words and phrases.
It is by far the most extensive evidence laid out publicly that almost makes it irrefutable.
Trump tried to walk back some of his remarks, but as the summer came to a close, the ultimate showdown was looming.
Conspiracy theory, deep state, the things that you've heard.
Mueller was closing in on the president's inner circle. Paul Manafort, guilty, and agreed to cooperate with Mueller.
Convicted in federal court on financial.
You got the guilty verdict in the Paul Manafort case.
Michael Cohen, guilty, and in open court implicated the president.
Former lawyer implicating him in campaign finance violations. Michael Cohen.
And reports that White House counsel Don McGahn, an eyewitness to the events in the West Wing, voluntarily talked to Mueller's team for 30 hours.
The stakes could be as large as whether Mueller can continue. This president may feel empowered to move finally, as we know he wants to do, to either fire Bob Mueller, or fire Jeff Sessions, or fire Rod Rosenstein, or find some way to shut this investigation down.
Mueller is not going to remove the President of the United States from office. He doesn't have that power, and I'm sure he doesn't have that ambition. The way that the president can be removed, if that's the goal, is through impeachment and conviction by the Senate or through elections. And both of those involve heavy doses of the involvement of the American people, either through their representatives in Congress or through elections. And that's why, at the end of the day, it's the American people who are going to decide Trump's fate.